Hey, welcome to Breakwood Carpentry. In today's video, I'm going to be building some display racks. My aunt owns a soap business, and she does a lot of trade shows, and she needs some way to display her soaps. So I offered to build her some shelves. This was the mock-up that I made for her. This was just a smaller version. The official design is going to have 4 shelves, so 1 more, and the thickness of the boards is going to be 4 inches. These are about 2.5, 3 inches. So the final depth of the shelf will be 20 inches and the height will be 20 inches. So it'll be like a square cut on the diagonal. It's also going to be 2 feet wide. So she needs 2 of those shelves and also a shelf with like little baskets so she can hold miscellaneous things. And I planned it out so that I should be able to use half a sheet of plywood for the 2 display shelves, and I should have a whole other half sheet to make bins and a similar shelf to hold different soap bombs and other things. So first thing I'm going to do is batch cut all of the strips that I need, and then I'll begin assembling everything. She also wants it to be stained in early American, and I'll be finishing it with a polycrylic protective coating. As far as pricing for everything, the amount of wood that I'm going to be using is just one 4x8 sheet of 1/2 inch plywood, birch plywood. I bought the finish, which was $7, or the stain was $7. The finish was about $17. And then a few other miscellaneous things like brushes and rags. As far as tools I'll be using, I'm going to be using the table saw to cut all the strips. I'll be using my miter saw to cut everything to length. And then I'll be using a compressor and a brad nail gun with glue to attach everything together. So instead of sending the entire sheet of plywood through this table saw, I'm going to be cutting it down to smaller pieces so that it's easier to feed through. I'm just measuring my blade width to make sure that I get an accurate measurement for how much my pieces need to be. So I don't know if you can see that, but the width of the tooth is just under 3/32 of an inch. So to be safe, I'm going to add an 1/8. So I need 13 strips plus 13 1/8 inches. Should be an extra 2 or so inches. So I'll cut that piece and then I'll run that through to get all my 4-inch strips. So I just cut this piece to 45.5 inches, and now I'll run it through at 4-inch strips and cut all the strips that I need. So I have all 11 strips here. 9 of these are going to be cut at 23.5, so I'll have 18 pieces at 23.5, and then the other 2 will be cut with 45s in them for the legs of the stand. So I'm going to head and set up a stop block to cut all these at 23.5. Then I'll measure out and cut the other ones where they need to be cut. So I'm going to go ahead and knock off the rough edge of all these pieces of plywood. Then I'll begin assembling the ladder display, and then I'll attach the sides and the base. I'll walk you through the whole process to show you how I do it. Okay, so now it's time for assembly. I'm going to be gluing the pieces together, and then I will clamp them, nail them, and continue on, and then attach them all so it creates sort of like stairs. I'm using 5/8 inch brad nails, 18 gauge. Throughout the assembly process, I sprinkled sawdust on any glue squeeze out. Totally optional and just as easy to scrape the glue off once you let it set up for a couple minutes. So I've made all the pieces. Now I'm going to be attaching them together. There will be 4 per unit, and then I'll add a back to the top because the top won't have a back. So I'll add the back, then I'll measure and cut the sides and the legs, and that'll be one shelf. It doesn't need to be sanded, stained, and finished. And then I'll plan out the basket shelf that I'll be building as well. So I want to add a round over to all the fronts of these edges before I attach the sides. So here's the finished stands. Now I'm going to be attaching sides that'll just cover this whole edge, and then there'll be a leg that comes down right here. I just realized now I didn't cut enough strips, so I need to cut 2 more. And I'll go ahead and attach those on there and show you what it looks like. So I've got the sides attached. Final step is to attach these legs here. So for the final shelf that's going to be holding some bins, this is what I have going so far. These are each going to hold 2 bins. But the issue I run into is that it's hard for me to keep these lined up where they need to go and attach them. So I'm going to be doing pocket holes in the bottoms, and that'll probably be the easiest way for me to keep it lined up and screw it down right where I need to put it. So. So here is the final shelf. And as far as lining these up, I got pretty close. It's not perfect, but it's close enough that it won't be that big of a deal. So I'm going to make bins to fit in here that are 7 inches by 7 3/4 inches. So there will be 6 of them. So I'm just assembling the boxes now. I've done 4 already. I'll show you how I do another one, and then I'm going to attach the bottoms. There's nothing fancy the way I'm doing these boxes. These are just small, simple boxes. Aren't going to be holding a lot of weight. There's no special joinery, just butt joints that are glued and nailed together. So I just line it all up, then put a clamp on it, and then from there I'll just shift and adjust everything. And that's it. Really simple, easy box. It'll be plenty sturdy for what it's going to be used for. Just needs to be sanded, stained, finished. So here are the final products. 2 shelves to display soap. This is to display bath bombs and other miscellaneous things. And the only thing I'd love to do is, I'm going to give a round over to the edges here. I already rounded over the edges of the shelves. I'm going to round over the box edges. Then I got to sand everything, stain it all, and put polycrylic on it. And that should be good. It'll be all set after that. So I'm going to go ahead and start sanding, and then I'll show you the finishing process. Just getting ready to start sanding everything. I decided that these points at the top here are a little too sharp. I don't want them to be a little bit of a hazard, so I'm going to draw a little radius and cut those out with a jigsaw. This is just a vacuum adapter that has the radius I want. It's about 1.25 inches. So I'm just going to put that on there, draw the radius, and then cut it out with the jigsaw. So first thing I'm going to do is sand everything with this orbital sander, starting with 80 grit. Then I'll go back with the hand sanding block, get all the edges and corners and things that I can't reach with this. And I'll start with 80, then I'll go 150, and then finish with 220. So after everything was sanded, I thoroughly cleaned all dust and began staining. I used a cheap disposable foam brush, but you can also just use a rag. I let the stain sit for a few minutes and then wiped off all excess. I stained the bins first and then continued with one shelf at a time, letting it dry and wiping it off after each shelf. And here's what they look like after stain. I let them dry for 24 hours before finishing because the stain that I used was oil-based and the water-based finish required that the oil-based stain dry longer. I covered my workbench in plastic and set up some scrap wood for everything to rest on. You want to make sure to stir your finish before and during the process, or it can come out inconsistent. I applied it using a cheap synthetic brush. They recommend a high-quality synthetic brush, but I didn't want to spend money on that. The following day, I sanded everything very lightly with 320 grit sandpaper. You want to do this to knock down any high spots that are formed by the polycrylic. I then removed all dust and then put one additional coat of the polycrylic. 2 coats worked out fine for me, but you can do more depending on your project, and you want to make sure you sand in between every coat. So this is the morning after the final coat of polycrylic finish. I was worried about the way it was going to dry because there was a drastic temperature drop last night. It's 39 here now, pretty cold. But they turned out great. They're nice and smooth. I only put 2 coats on. I'm pretty happy with the way that they came out. So now I just need to bring them over to my aunt and see what she thinks. I really wanted to make these bins removable, and I'm glad I did. It makes it a lot easier for her to load things in and then empty them out. Instead of having to hand grab everything out of all of them, you can just pick one up and move it wherever you need. And if she ever needed to use these for something else, maybe just set them on a table or something, it gives her more options that way, and it didn't really add that much work. So I plan on continuing to post every Sunday, so stay tuned for more videos, and thanks for watching.